Je suis le représentant du WorldDAB sur la France et je vais donc conduire cet entretien avec Jean-Éric Valli.
I'm going to conduct a little talk with Jean-Éric, and in order to start with, perhaps you can start by introducing yourself. Jean-Éric Valli, president of Les Indés Radios. It's an economic consortium with 130 radios in France, which represents 7 million listeners every day. And we cover the whole of the territory in France. And you're also chairman of Radioplayer France. Radioplayer France is a platform to listen to radio online. And it has the possibility of being connected to many devices like computers, radios, or others. And we associated with other radio groups in France, Altis, Lagardère, M6, and Energy. Just for people in the room, these are groups Altis, RMC, M6 is RTL, Lagardère, Europe 1, soon Europe 2, which is coming back on the waves, and RFM, all the Radio France group, Les Indés Radios. We are also present, as I said. So I think that we managed to have quite a good spectrum of listeners, about 95% of listeners. How is the market of radio in France? I think it is doing well. One of the shortcomings is that we are very much under the influence of the discourse from GAFA. Perhaps we are gullible, but 40 million listeners listen to the radio live, and 10 million listen to the radio in replays, so that's for 65 million inhabitants. Yesterday, we had 43 million listeners. So that when you say yesterday, what do you mean? 10 years ago. What is changing? The ways people listen to the radio. As broadcasters, we must be careful to remain adaptable to this new way of listening. But it is not that people do not like the radio. When I said that we are influenced by GAFA, we have a tendency to give credence to the big headlines in newspapers saying that the radio is going down, etc. I think it's very important to refer to the real figures, real statistics, and analyze competitors. And I think there is an interesting trend, which is complementarity, to have traditional radio complemented by DAB. These are friends and foes, both. But if they can win at the end of the day, they will do it. And if they can suppress radio in the car, then they will do it. And what is the space in your strategy on DAB Plus and France? I am absolutely convinced that the listener wants a digital sound. So DAB is a real response. Because he wants quality? Yes? I think two reasons. The sound quality, because you also listen to music on the internet, and when you have FM, it's not as good a sound as internet. DAB sound is better, because I think the signal is stronger compared to the multiple coding on internet. I'm not sure I can explain that really technically, but the listener feels it. There is a difference. And since radio is a medium for emotion, feeling, I think that people feel it. We need to have a radio that updates itself from a sound point of view. But with DAB, you are in the world of today. FM is the world of yesterday. It is not flattering for us. We think that it is today's world, FM, but the young generation think that FM is yesterday. and DAB is today. So this is really in our strategy. There is a phenomenon at present we have developed by buying radio stations in my group. And today we are developing by positioning ourselves on DAB frequencies. You mentioned sound quality, you mentioned development across the territory with DAB, which wasn't possible otherwise. And you mentioned the GAFA, who are partners, but we can't be naive. So you are able to resist to the internet, or is that a good word to use? DAB enables us to do something that we forget sometimes. It is quite fashionable in the news at the moment, in the recent news especially, the notion of sovereignty. We have a radio program which we are sending to listeners, and we want a direct link between listeners and the radio. And DAB is a direct link, like FM, but internet is not a direct link, because there is always a gatekeeper, there is always something. Radioplayer is also a direct link for us, but we are on the internet. It's a universe that we don't control. What is the certainty that this is going to be broadcast? It's a completely different environment. For us, it's important to be able to speak to our listeners, and I think that radio is also a crisis medium. We need to be able to talk to the population, to speak to people, and have a network of broadcast. And it's very important to have the way of transmitting to people. And I think that in the heart of French people, it's certainly true in other European countries, the first medium, the most trusted medium is radio. For the link, the social link, sound quality, any other aspect you want to emphasize? I think it's a living medium. Radio is a living medium. It is not a robot. And a radio broadcast is a vehicle for feeling, for emotion. I think this is something very special to radio. In May 2022, the economic magazine Challenge had as a headline, "How do you bury FM?" Okay, it is a headline written by journalists, and this was at the time that we launched a new electric car, the new electric Mégane. And yesterday, we also heard that there was a reinforcement of partnership between the car and Google. Does that mean that it is the end of radio broadcast? I don't think so. Earlier, I mentioned that we are influenced by big headlines, and when we are with a car manufacturer like Renault, who wants to innovate, we have a snapshot of the situation. I think it's very important to underline a parameter in the radio, which is simplicity. I am in a car and I receive a signal through the waves. I press a button and the radio goes on. In an internet connected system, I am in a different environment, technologically, philosophically. And on the radio, the deal is simple. I listen to something free of charge, and in exchange, I have some advertisements. If I go online, I go on a web store, and as soon as I go on a web store, people are going to try and sell me something. And to come back to Renault, intuitively, they know, instinctively, they know that they need to have an updated dashboard, and they want to have a partner with it because they think it's very complicated, but they need to keep the radio at the center. As yourself, you use DAB, you use FM. This is all complementary. I think this brings us to the hybrid radio, that is, taking the public with us without bothering him with technical considerations. To have FM going into DAB Plus in a seamless way. So we are working on that at Radioplayer to make sure that this tool is hybrid. Even Radioplayer doesn't exclude broadcast, it associates broadcast, and we are working with various manufacturers so that we can transmit this signal into the radio. What is happening in France and what can we expect in the coming years? That's a very good question. I think that we need to publicize DAB+. And we already have our logo on every device we can. And I'm also thinking that we should better work with radio manufacturers, because maybe the question is not going to arise. I am buying a radio today. It is already equipped with DAB, at least in France. And in cars and outside cars, there is already DAB, and there is an alphabetical list of radio stations. And there are many manufacturers of radios today that do not distinguish anymore between DAB and FM. And we have both presence, and on FM it says FM with the name of the radio station, and on DAB Plus it mentions. So we have twice as many radio stations in the list, but the listener is informed about that. We have to have communications on that. And we have created an association with all the players on the radio, and the Ministry of Culture is going to provide some funding, which is very good news. We're going to have a better communications campaign. But with the present tools for broadcast, I think that we can have some pedagogy in the way that radio is used and called. And so we're going to see more of that in the coming months. Any particular word to conclude? Thank you very much for welcoming me through this video. I'm sorry that I can't be here with you, and I'm passionate about radio. I think it's a super medium, and we have a great future ahead of us. And considering all the questions we've had to ask ourselves, I'm very optimistic.